This is the sound of Trump.
There are moments in American public life that seem small on the surface, but reveal something enormous when you slow down and think about what you're actually watching.
People, excuse me, many people, excuse me, many, you're gonna be happy, you're gonna be happy, like, you know, happy, you're gonna be, excuse me, many people, excuse me, you're gonna be happy, I know a lot of happy. It's a symphony of madness.
A 70-year-old comedian walks onto a stage, raises his hands in a specific way, squints in a specific way, and begins speaking in a specific cadence.
Trump took him down so fast, he just went, you know, Jeb, you're a low-energy individual, okay? You're very tired, you're very, very tired.
And somewhere in Florida, the sitting president of the United States watches it happen and cannot do a single thing about it. Not with his lawyers, not with his platforms, not with the Federal Communications Commission, not with the threats that have silenced other voices, not with any of the levers of power he has spent a lifetime learning how to pull. Because the man standing on that stage is Dana Carvey. And what Carvey represents in this moment is something no amount of political power can solve. He found the one weapon that authority cannot control. And the story of how that weapon works, and why it drives this particular president to a place no other president has gone, tells you more about the state of American power right now than any policy debate or approval rating ever could. To understand why Carvey matters, you have to understand his craft. Because what he does is fundamentally different from what most political comedians do. He's not a late addition to this space. He's been doing it since he joined Saturday Night Live in 1986. He built characters that became cultural shorthand, impressions people could recognize in a single syllable. But his real skill was never exaggeration. It was precision. He listens for rhythm, the cadence of how someone speaks, the verbal habits people don't even realize they have, the pauses between words, the repetition, the slight shifts in tone that reveal more than the words themselves. He once described Trump's speaking style in a way that reframes how you hear every speech the man gives afterward. He called it a symphony of madness, like someone casually pitching a family vacation who keeps circling back, always selling, always reinforcing. And once you hear it that way, it sticks. That's the critical difference between what Carvey does and what most political comedy does. A joke fades after the punchline lands. A rhythm stays with you. Once you hear the pattern, you can't unhear it. Every time Trump speaks after that, part of your brain is listening for the cadence Carvey identified, and it finds it every single time. By the way, please leave your questions or comments in the comments section. I will answer each one individually as time permits. Also, I would be very happy if you liked the video and subscribe to my channel. Now, let's continue. That ability matters because it cannot be regulated. You cannot sue cadence. You cannot file a complaint against tone. You cannot issue a formal denial of a rhythm that the audience can already hear for themselves. And once that recognition clicks, it becomes permanent. It spreads quietly, person to person, replay to replay, until it's no longer just a performance. It becomes a shared understanding of how a public figure actually sounds when you strip away the staging and the authority and just listen to the pattern of the words. But the real key to this story sits decades earlier, and it involves a very different president responding to a very different situation. For years, Carvey portrayed George H.W. Bush, not just as a figure of authority, but as a voice people could instantly identify. Catchphrases Carvey invented for Bush were repeated so often they blurred into public memory. People couldn't always tell which lines were real Bush and which were Carvey's invention. And what did Bush do in response? He invited Carvey to the White House. They met. They talked. They laughed together. Bush openly acknowledged the impression and even credited it with helping people connect with him on a human level. That response didn't weaken Bush. It humanized him. It showed a kind of confidence that could absorb a joke instead of resisting it. It demonstrated that the man holding the most powerful office in the world was secure enough in himself and in his authority to let someone make fun of him on national television and then shake that person's hand. Now compare that to what happened decades later. In 2019, after a single comedy sketch on Saturday Night Live, Donald Trump publicly suggested that federal agencies should investigate it. His own advisors had to explain that satire is protected by the First Amendment. The legal outcome was never in question. Satire has been constitutionally protected since the founding of the Republic. But the instinct behind the reaction mattered far more than the outcome. It wasn't about whether anything could be done legally. It was about the desire to find some mechanism, any mechanism, to make it stop. That desire is what separates the two responses, and it's what makes the Carvey story resonate so deeply in this particular political moment. By 2025 and 2026, the pattern had become clearer and more aggressive. Public criticism aimed directly at comedians by name, calls for networks to reconsider content, legal pressure surrounding jokes delivered on major platforms. The atmosphere around political satire shifted in ways that didn't require any change in the law to be felt by every performer working in the space. Pressure introduces hesitation. It makes writers second-guess lines before they're delivered. It makes producers weigh whether a joke is worth the incoming storm of social media attacks from a president's supporters. It encourages caution at every level of the production chain, even when the First Amendment hasn't budged. And for many comedians and late-night hosts, that pressure worked exactly as intended. Some softened their approach. Some avoided Trump material entirely, calculating that the blowback wasn't worth the segment. Some stepped away from political comedy altogether, choosing different targets or different formats that wouldn't put a crosshair on their careers. The chilling effect didn't come from a change in the law. It came from a change in the cost of speaking. And that distinction matters, because it means the suppression happened without anyone having to pass a single regulation. The threat was enough. Except for one person. Dana Carvey stepped back into the spotlight during Saturday Night Live's 50th season and did exactly what he has always done. No escalation. No outrage. No attempt to match intensity with intensity. No political manifesto disguised as comedy. Just the rhythm. The same careful listening he's been doing since 1986. The same deliberate pacing. The same surgical focus on tone instead of ideology. And the audience responded the way they always have when Carvey performs. Not with forced laughter driven by political loyalty or performative applause to signal which side of the aisle they sit on. With recognition. Pure, unforced recognition. They laughed because they already understood what they were hearing. Carvey didn't need to tell them what to think about Trump. He just played them the sound, and they completed the thought on their own. That is the comedy that power cannot reach. That creates a problem that no political strategy can solve because the usual responses don't apply. You cannot dismiss it as partisan when the comedian built his entire reputation impersonating figures from both parties across 4 decades. You cannot dismiss it as irrelevant when millions continue to watch and share the clips. And you cannot effectively attack it because the comedy doesn't rely on distortion. It relies on accuracy. The impression works because it's right, and everyone watching knows it's right. That shared knowledge, the moment where an entire audience laughs for the same reason regardless of where they stand politically, is the thing that power cannot reach. Carvey himself has described his goal in the simplest possible terms. Make it funny to everyone. Not one side. Not one audience. Everyone. And that universality is what makes it uncontrollable. Partisan comedy can be dismissed by the side it targets. Comedy that both sides laugh at cannot be dismissed by anyone. It exists in the space between performance and perception, where control has no purchase and interpretation belongs entirely to the audience. This is why the contrast between Bush and Trump matters so much more than it might appear on the surface. It isn't really a story about comedy at all. It's a story about the relationship between power and vulnerability, and about what a leader's response to being mocked reveals about the foundation their authority actually rests on. Bush understood something that Trump apparently cannot accept. That being laughed at by your own country is not a threat to your authority. It's evidence that your country still feels free enough to laugh. A democracy where comedians are afraid to mock the president is not a healthy democracy. A democracy where the president can watch himself being mocked on national television and then invite the man who did it into his home is a democracy that still has the confidence to function as one. Bush's response to Carvey's impression demonstrated that kind of confidence. The president who could laugh at his own caricature was a president who didn't need the performance of invincibility to hold his position. Trump's response revealed the opposite. The president who called for federal investigations over a comedy sketch demonstrated an insecurity that the comedy itself had barely begun to probe. And that insecurity is the real story. Because when the most powerful person in the world treats a comedian as a threat serious enough to warrant institutional response, the comedian has already won. Not because the joke was devastating, not because the impression was cruel, but because the reaction revealed exactly the vulnerability the comedy was pointing at. The impulse to control laughter is itself the proof that the laughter landed. At 70 years old, Dana Carvey has become something genuinely rare in American public life. Not the loudest voice, not the most political voice, not the voice with the biggest platform or the sharpest attacks. Just the one voice that the most powerful man in the world cannot silence, cannot sue, cannot regulate, and cannot stop people from hearing. And the reason he can't be stopped is the simplest reason of all. He's right. The impression is accurate. The rhythm is real. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it. History has seen this dynamic before. The record of which response ages better, absorbing the joke or trying to contain it, is consistent and unambiguous. One president invited the comedian who mocked him into his home. Another tried to make the joke stop through pressure and resistance. Decades later, people still remember both responses. And they remember them for very different reasons.